Excellent. So welcome back, everybody. As Lynn mentioned, we were able to find a couple of presenters to come and answer some of your remaining questions that you identified a couple sessions ago. So we have two presenters tonight, and this will be a little bit of a different format. We're not going to take the full 10 minutes of presentation like we have for previous presenters. This is really just time for you to ask your questions of these folks. So tonight we have with us Lisa Arkin, who's the Executive Director of Beyond Toxics here in Eugene. And we have Matt Hassel with the Angelo Planning Group. And so what I'm gonna do is, so I forgot to grab a coin. I don't have a nice.
Alex, actually, Lisa's not here yet unless I'm missing her in the list. So
okay.
No need to coin toss.
To find a coin on my desk. Okay, that's great. Thank you, Kelly. So fate has been our randomizer. Matt will speak to us first. And Matt, I'll just give you a minute to introduce yourself, and then we'll have 9 minutes for the panel to ask you questions.
Great. Okay. My name is Matt Hasty, and I am a consultant. I work for a firm called Angelo Planning Group, and I'm the consultant team project manager for this project to help the city of Eugene come up with a set of zoning code requirements related to middle housing that are consistent with the guidelines and rules that the state has been developing. So that's kind of my job, is to coordinate the members of the consulting team to do that, oversee those efforts. And then Terry at the city, who you've heard from previously, I think is like my counterpart at the city and gives me direction. And I coordinate with her and other staff people in that. And I will just also note that I also have been the consultant team project manager to develop the middle housing model code for the state. So I've worked with Ethan Stuckmeyer, who you also, I think, heard from earlier in this process on that effort. And we're getting pretty close to the conclusion of that effort. And if people have questions about that, I can kind of talk about where we are. So that's my intro.
Great, thanks, Matt. And I'm sorry for misreading the I in your last name as an L. Perfect. So first I want to bring up Francisco, who had the question that we thought Matt could cover well. So Francisco, would you start us off by asking your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So my main question was, since we know that the zoning codes in Eugene are pretty strict, and they're not very, I don't know how to say, like very friendly in order to apply this HB 2001 bill, how do we as individuals, can we influence whoever is in charge of changing those codes to make it more easier and make them more for developers to actually being able to build this with no so much waiting time? I hope that makes sense, my question. Thank you, Matt.
Sure. So I'll kind of take my best shot at that, and then I can answer follow-up questions if I need to. So I would say a couple of things. One, I would say that kind of the whole intent of HB 2001 is to make it easier to build some of these housing types, duplexes, triplexes, row houses, in a larger number of residential zones in the city of Eugene and in other cities around the state. So the legislation and the rules that the state's coming up with are already kind of aimed in that direction. And I would say that the rules they're pretty prescriptive. They do give cities a certain amount of flexibility in terms of how they develop their own standards and their own rules. And one of the things they allow cities to do is to be, frankly, even more flexible than what the state kind of minimum compliance rules say. So the state sort of set some guidelines and some sideboards and says, cities, you can't really be kind of more restrictive than the rules that the state has set, but you can be less restrictive. So I would say, as individuals or a group, you can sort of advocate for more flexibility or for being kind of less restrictive or less strict in terms of where and how these types of housing are allowed to be developed within the city of Eugene. So that's kind of the general answer. I think the answer about kind of how can they be developed more quickly, or can we reduce the sort of the amount of time it takes a city to review a proposal, that's a little more challenging and a little less directly addressed by the state guidelines. But one of the requirements of the state is for cities to allow these types of housing through what's called a clear and objective process. And that means that there can't be discretion in those processes, and it has to go through a fairly straightforward sort of land use permitting or approval process. So, I guess that's not a developer. A city could say, hey, developer, if you want to go through a discretionary process to get even more out of the process, you could do that. They could give that option, but they have to provide for that clear and objective and more, I would say, straightforward process as well. So I would say just kind of advocating for those things, kind of making it clear that you value those things would be one way to influence what the city ultimately does. And what the city council will be ultimately the group that adopts these regulations with advice and guidance from community members, as well as the city's planning commission. So I would say sort of advocating to those two groups for whether it's specific standards or just specific principles like flexibility, like ease of development, et cetera, would be a way that you as an individual or other individuals could influence things. Does that help?
Yeah. Actually, that helps. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Great. I see we have another hand from Robert.
Good evening, Matt. Thank you for joining us this evening. My question is more in a general question, because I know the details are the devil's in the details of this thing. But could you give us a general sense of what is it that the cities can decide to stay within the confines of not being more restrictive, and what can we decide as a city that can be less restrictive? Just a general swag, I suppose.
Sure. So I'll give you sort of maybe 2 or 3 examples. There'll be kind of a mix of general and specific, I guess. One of the things the city can decide, and there are some guidelines from the state on this, is kind of what size properties can be developed for some of these different types of housing. So the city can't require that properties larger than a certain size be, or that somebody have a property that's larger than a certain size to be developed for this. So they can't say, let's say you have to have a 10,000 square foot lot if you want to develop a duplex or a triplex. So the city could be less restrictive and say you could develop those things on even smaller lots than what the state's kind of threshold is. So that's one. Same thing with some of the other kind of types of development standards. So for instance, building height. The city needs to either apply a standard related to building height, the same one it applies to single family development, single family detached homes, and can't say you have to use a lower height or require a lower height for a duplex or a triplex. But it could say those buildings could be taller than a single family detached home. So there's a number of different ways in terms of development standards where the city can be essentially less restrictive in terms of some of those standards for duplexes, triplexes, et cetera, than they are for single family detached homes. Same thing with sort of, there's some kind of standards related to the kind of the appearance of a house or a duplex, whatever it might be. There's a few things where the state has said these types of standards are fine. And if you want to do something more than that, be more restrictive, you have to show that there's not going to be kind of unreasonable cost or delay associated with that. But the city could say, well, we want to require a little less. We don't even want to say that windows have to take up a certain percentage of the house or whatever it might be. So again, in terms of appearance, the city could apply fewer requirements than are identified in the state's model code and that are applied to other forms of housing in the area. Does that help? That was maybe getting a little far down into the weeds, but hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you. That was quite helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. We've got a couple minutes left, so I think probably just time for one last question from Aaron.
Unmuted. Hi, Matt. My question is, have you heard or been part of discussions about setting precedents or raising the bar when it comes to either sustainable building design and materials or increasing accessibility for low-income people with middle housing?
So neither of those topics in particular have been part of the sort of the discussion around these, I'll call them kind of basic standards or requirements associated with complying with or implementing the HB 2001 middle housing standards. I have been part of those discussions in other communities, and I've worked on kind of development code updates that promote both of those types of things, both standards that would encourage use of sustainable building materials or sustainable design practices, as well as strategies to either promote housing that's more just physically accessible to people and or that's affordable to people with lower incomes or have other particular housing needs. So I have been involved in those discussions kind of outside of this process, I would say.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you so much, Matt and question askers. And I'm sorry that we're not going to get to your question, Troy, because we have to move on now to Lisa Arkin. So Lisa, welcome to the panel. Thank you for being here. Lisa Arkin, again, is the Executive Director of Beyond Toxics here in Eugene. And Lisa, I will give you just 1 minute to introduce yourself to the panel, and then we'll take 9 minutes for them to ask you questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I feel very honored to be here tonight. My name is Lisa Arkin. I've been Executive Director of Beyond Toxics for about 14 years and have also served as a Lane County Planning Commissioner for 8 years. I also currently serve on the Technical Advisory Committee for the Envision Eugene Urban Growth oh my gosh, the Urban Reserves, there we go. Sophie's probably wondering why I can't remember that. Urban Reserves, and have, I really take civic duty seriously. With Beyond Toxics, I promote environmental justice and protection of air quality, water, and land. And we have long worked in West Eugene on issues of air and water quality and well-being for the communities there.
Great, thank you so much, Lisa. And we'll start off with the question that kind of identified a gap in the panel's information that brought you here today. And Jose is here to present that question. Oh, Jose, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us. So I've been lucky enough to go on one of your toxic tours that you give to get to know the city of Eugene. And one of the things that struck out to me is that there are sections of Eugene where there is more affordable housing that also tends to be the more toxic parts of the city. And as such, not only are the housing conditions not the best, but also the environmental conditions not the best. And so for those of us who are considering how to think about middle housing to go in neighborhoods that whether by design or default are more exclusionary, but are also more healthy. Just wanted to get kind of your oversight of that discrepancy and disparity, and for you to describe what some of those environmental issues are that certain parts of Eugene face every day.
Thank you very much for that question, Jose. Boy, that's a big one. It's a big question. We find that a lot of the residents who live in the Bethel neighborhood or West Eugene really love their neighborhood, and they love their neighbors, and they're proud to live there, and they enjoy being part of the Bethel School District. So to me, the first step is to ensure that those people can feel also that they're living in a healthy neighborhood. So we have looked at how we can modify our land use laws to ensure that residential and educational areas, also recreation areas like city parks, are not placed near toxic industry going into the future, because we know that the city is going to grow. We've worked with the city of Eugene to create a new land use law that actually prevents the most toxic of types of industry and creates distances, as well as takes into account climate equity, making sure that we preserve parts of our landscape that can sequester carbon and cool down our urban temperatures. So just to summarize that is, going into the future, as we grow out to the west, which is where the city is definitely going to be growing, we have to make sure we're not recreating the same problems that already exist. And then there needs to be investment in the West Eugene neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods you referred to where the housing stock is maybe not up to par. And for example, the NAACP, both on the national level and the local level, have certain action plan to make sure that housing is built to sustainable design standards or upgraded, that they have energy retrofits, and that burden is not placed on the people living in the home, or that renters are not excluded from those housing upgrades. Because we want people to live in the neighborhood where they want to live. And if that's West Eugene, they shouldn't have to feel like, wow, I'm kind of stuck here in this bad neighborhood with no help to improve my situation. So investing, following the guidelines of, for example, the NAACP, and investing in our communities to create the kind of standards that exist in other communities. That's really important. And everyone should be valued in that way, and to feel like they love living where they live, and that they're supported by local or state government to have the best housing standards possible. Did I cover everything you asked? It was a big question.
Yeah, and I'll leave it at that, and others can jump in with other questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And let's go to Troy next.
Hi, Lisa. I have a question that is concerning more of your background and planning experience, but I was wondering if you had any suggestions as to how the city might be able to incentivize converting existing properties into middle housing from single family homes, as opposed to the more time-consuming process of building new housing, in order to kind of get this moving along faster.
Mm-hmm. So the question is how to bring more middle housing into existing neighborhoods, right? Is that it?
How to, rather than build brand new middle housing, how to convert single family homes that already exist into middle housing. If you have any suggestions on how to incentivize that. If not, that's okay. Just
well, that's an interesting question, because some single family homes, older, smaller homes, are affordable and may also be the target of developers to raise those homes and to create multifamily dwellings there. And that's a really interesting question. You know, if someone is existing on a middle-class salary, let's say somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000, should they be told that their home is going to be torn down in order to build an apartment building? I mean, these are tough questions. One thing that I've been disappointed in the city is that the city had gotten a couple of US EPA Brownfields grants. And the purpose of the grant was to identify lands that had some issue, maybe a past gas station was on the land or some kind of underground oil tank or something. And the federal government was giving money to identify those lands, make a cleanup plan, and repurpose those lands. And we missed a big opportunity there. I'll give you an example of an opportunity missed is at the corner of 99 and I think it's Roosevelt? No. Four Corners, wherever that is. A huge gas station was built there about a year ago, where it's right next to a St. Vinny's housing development. And so now we're bringing more fossil fuels into our community. We put a mega gas station right near a low-income housing, which totally devalues the neighborhood, whereas that could have been a way to use that whole Four Corners area to build shopping, housing, I don't know, schools, daycares. And now who wants to live next to a gas station with, I think, 24 pumps, something like that? So I really have to wonder, are we using the opportunities that have been presented to the city to really make the most of lots that are currently vacant and could be used for middle income housing and livable, walkable neighborhoods? So they, just for example, right across from that new gas station, they just tore down an old building that had some businesses. Does anyone know what's planned for that corner? I don't know. There's another lot right at 11th and Lincoln that has been empty for, I don't know, decades. That would be a beautiful spot for multi-unit housing close to downtown. And the city could look for incentives to help develop that.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. All right, so we are out of time for Q&A, unfortunately for Sam and Vicky. I'm sorry we didn't get to your questions, but thank you so much for being here with us, Lisa and Matt. If you're still here, we appreciate that, coming on short notice to answer some of the panel's remaining questions. So let's see, is Lynn's wordsmithing group back with us now?
Can I ask one part? If you want to send questions by email, if you feel you didn't get the chance, and if it's helpful, happy to answer.
Yeah, and if anybody emails Lisa, just same process, make sure that that information is brought back to the panel in some way, but thank you for offering that, Lisa.
Yeah, and I would just say the same if there are additional questions that you, Alex, or Lynn want to send to me that are from the committee, from the panel, I'm happy to provide some email answers as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so thank you.
Much appreciated. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Do I leave and say goodbye?
Yeah, yeah, you're good. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
We'll pass it over to, well, no, actually I won't. Just confirming that Lynn is here and ready to do a report out. Okay, excellent. So as we were asking these questions to fill in the gaps, the Wordsmithing Task Committee was hard at work identifying some categories that will help us work with the principles that we've generated. So I'm going to share my screen and see what they've done here and invite that group to present out their work to the panel. Is there somebody designated to do that, Lynn?
Yes. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize my thing was on. Yes, Marissa is going to report out. And I'm still putting the last couple ones in here.
Okay, perfect. So take
So
it away.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Marissa. Go ahead and share with us what you did here and explain anything you'd like to, and then we'll just have a few minutes for large group discussion. And feel free to tell me to scroll down if you need me to here.
I have a whole copy of the list myself, so you can scroll down at your leisure. We initially came up with about 9, maybe 10 different categories, and then after coming through some of the notes from the 5 groups that we did last time, we ended up with 13. So first and foremost, I think, is affordability. Everyone had something to say about that. That pretty much goes at the top of the list. And next is accessibility, both in terms of access to resources and accessibility in the sense of accommodations for the disabled. Next is easing restrictions and regulations, especially as they pertain to ADUs. And then sustainability and environmental concerns, subsidies and incentives, providing a diversity of housing types, as in the number of units in a particular structure. If you want to scroll down, the rest of the list is down there. Renters, some people had things to say about renters' rights, so that went into its own little category, even though there wasn't a lot to say about it per se. Equal distribution of middle housing across all neighborhoods, and preserving the currently available affordable housing, not tearing down perfectly good houses that are already there. After that, addressing issues of race, ethnicity, inclusivity, social issues, things like that. Gentrification, city accountability, and lastly, homelessness and transitional housing. If anybody has any questions and needs anything clarified, feel free to ask.
Thanks, Marissa. Okay, so our task for the next few minutes here is to kind of just review the wordsmithing group's work and make sure that these are the categories that we want to work with the principals for the rest of this evening. And so my invitation are for folks to step up and say, if you think that any of these categories really need to be split apart more, combined together, kind of if there are any big structural amendments that we want to make so that these are the right categories. So I see that Sam, let's see, we've got some hands going up. Sam, you put your hand up before that instruction. Do you still have a comment there?
I do, yeah. I just didn't know if you were taking questions or anything like that. I have 2 questions. First, homelessness is misspelled, and I'm just, I just noticed that. But second,
My bad.
It's not a big deal. But I am wondering if they are prioritized in some fashion?
No, the rationale behind these categories is that I went through the flip chart of the last session that we had, where we had 5 groups and everyone came up with their own ideas, and just put them into their own categories that seemed separate. They're not prioritized. They're not any proposals that I or my group are making. They're just things that were very distinct in the notes that we made last time.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Great. And before we dive in more here, I just want to check in with Lynn. Can we take till 6:55 for this section?
Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm.
So we have 5 minutes, which means this is really just time for any kind of glaring errors, anything that really needs to be combined together or majorly changed, not kind of like wordsmithing things. So let's go to Jose.
I guess I just have a clarification question.
Mhm.
I know ADUs are a big concern for many people, but that's a different policy. And so I'm wondering, to what degree does this group charged with a specific policy have influence in another policy, and whether that complicates the matter? I guess it's a question of focus. Not to say that that's not an important issue, but just wondering what the relationship is there if we're charged with a different policy.
Can I step in there? The similar question came up actually in this group about sort of relevancy of certain things, and I just at this stage, it's not a thing to worry about too much. We're just trying to sort of get things in buckets, but the relevancy conversation will happen later today and definitely a lot tomorrow as things are being moved up and down the list, that kind of thing.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. Chaya.
My only question is it affordability and subsidies and incentives really similar to each other? Because don't you get affordability through the incentives and subsidies? Like, shouldn't it be like a subcategory or put together or combined?
What if it's environmental, like eco sustainability subsidies, though? Like building subsidies, you know what I mean?
True, I guess it depends on different kinds of subsidies, I guess. I was thinking more of that you get affordable housing by giving them subsidies, but didn't think about an environmental one.
So let's, it sounds like we've got a proposal to combine affordability with subsidies and incentives. And thank you for contributing there, Abigail. And I want to ask the wordsmithing group if you would be comfortable with that combination.
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Just go ahead and do that and work with that for the evening. So is that okay with the wordsmithing group at this stage to combine those?
Personally, I feel like subsidies and incentives is kind of a subcategory of affordability. So if we want to combine it in that way, that would make sense. But I also want to hear from other people in the wordsmithing group.
Yeah, I think Shay's made a very good point. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, great. I'm not hearing any dissenters, so we'll go ahead and do that. Combine those.
Super, I'll do that.
Oh, you'll do that? Okay, better if I don't try now. And we've got a couple more minutes, so let's go to Robert.
I think I came into, my question came in a little late after the vote, but just to make a point that are subsidies purely towards affordability, or are there other incentives that do not hit affordability directly or affect affordability directly, but could be used to, say, improve an environment or sustainability? So just
that's a separate one. That's a separate principle anyway.
Yeah.
Sustainability and environment.
So just a thought.
Okay, but you're
I'm sure during but I'm sure during the actual drafting process we could put a little line in there recommending particular kinds of subsidies and incentives. So combining the categories isn't necessarily striking the idea entirely.
Okay.
Yeah, and there might be some overlap at this point. This is mostly just to get us into groups to work on the principles later on. So these categories won't even necessarily end up in your final report. We're not sure about that yet. So one final comment from Michelle.
I was gonna ask if you could, good list, by the way, if you could give me an example of under city accountability that was kind of at the bottom more, what's along those lines, please? Thank you.
Does someone want to answer that?
Yeah, I can read you a couple of bullet points that were copy pasted from the notes last time. Like some examples are people mentioning that time is of the essence. This issue is worse during the pandemic. People need to be bold. The draft has the potential to be as impactful as possible for people who need it most, possibly a public hearing or public input during development, maybe even modifying HB 2001, continuous improvement of policy, basically just things that kind of fell outside the scope of some of these other categories, but I felt like they pertained to responsibilities of the city.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. That's perfect. Thank you.
Great. All right, well, thank you, everybody. And I will pass it back to Lynn to introduce the next section of what we're actually going to do with these categories.
Alex, thanks everybody for all the work there. So we're going to go into another group into small groups. These are going to be the same groups that you were in last time when you were brainstorming principles during the last session. And that's because you'll be looking at your principles that you brainstormed in the last session, and also the ones that that came before you, because you were already looking at a few. Most groups already had a list, and then you added to it last time. So look at the whole list within your group. And your job at this stage is to identify the principles in there within your group that belong where they belong in certain categories. And I know some members of the panel have done some of that at home, so that's an additional boon to the groups that they're in. But yeah, so work within the group that you are in to identify principles, where they go, and your small group moderators will copy and paste them into the correct categories. And we will take until 7:23 for this.